I'm Jason Beaubien. I'm with National Public Radio. I'm our Global Health and Development correspondent. And it's great to be here with you today, here in Aspen. And we were just talking just before we got started just about just how amazing this festival is. And I'm wondering from your perspective, is this a place where you can come and sort of get re-energized about some of these issues that you're so passionate about?
I have found it incredibly stimulating and delightful. It was mentioned that I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and so being in the mountains is natural for me. That's definitely, it's like the mountains are my Avalon. I generally do not wear shoes. I'm very challenged in cities, where footwear is, if not required, suggested, because I might pick up Hep C or something like that, which someone on a street in New York City actually had to tell me once. So it feels good, and I just love being with people who are connecting their heads and their hearts, the most difficult, I think, 18 inches I certainly ever travel. And I'm delighted I've been asked before and pleased that I finally said yes. So thank you, Walter, for asking again and again.
I want to go back to when you first started to get involved in humanitarian work. I'm wondering if there was there sort of one moment? I know that early on you thought about going into the Peace Corps and then ended up getting
in a different jungle.
In a different jungle in Hollywood, and you got into that career and you were incredibly successful, and you're still incredibly successful. You starred in Divergent last year. Was there a moment though when you switched over to starting to focus more on international issues and really dedicating more of your time to that?
Well, I appreciate the question, Jason, and what really stood out to me was the human and humanitarian. And it's, I know that anyway, y'all are here to see Shug, my dog, and not me, and she's right there in the second row. And before I go any further, I just kind of want to be myself, if that's okay. I mean, yeah. I would be myself and hopefully whatever I say, because I'm very well suited for the role. But when I was reminding myself that this is called a conversation with, and it's under dignity and equality, I decided that I wanted to visit with y'all in the way that I visit with anyone, and that means I'm going to pray. And if you are spiritually fit and you don't need prayer, take a little nap. Maybe integrate some of the experiences that you've had earlier at the festival, or you can just plain old leave if it's offensive to you. And the reason I do it is because, I want to come sometimes from my head. I want to make sure that I wrote that paper that won a special award at Harvard Law School, right? But the most important thing I can do is to come from my heart. And even visiting with Walter last night, he was like, so what are you doing right now? And it's always, I'm a social justice feminist. I work on equality issues around the world. What I'm really here to do is to love, period. That's what I do. I love. And PSI has given me an amazing ability to love people around the world and to meet them where they are at, which is exactly what I needed as a child. And so I think that vulnerability is so much harder than trying to be smart, So what I typically do is I take a moment of silence. I know an ecumenical prayer that seems to work well for me. If you happen to know it, you're free to say it with me. If you don't have a God of your understanding, you can borrow mine. She is awesome. And with that, so I also have a yoga teacher here, and she would say, put both feet on the floor.
All right, both feet on the floor.
Oh, and it's the Serenity Prayer, if you happen to know it. Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And that's what social justice is all about.
But that's often a difficult one. Like, what can we change? What there's 1 billion people out there living in extreme poverty. Does it ever overwhelm you, the extent of the needs out there in the world? And how do you navigate, okay, I'm going to focus on this, I'm not going to focus on this? How do you manage choosing what it is you have the power to change?
Well, that's also one of the things I like to discuss with other providers. So I think it's abusive to point out a problem without also highlighting a solution. And so I was much more overwhelmed when I started before I found some kind of an emotional, and I'll say the word spiritual, container that worked for me in order to be self-sustaining and self-supporting in an acknowledged, whatever, difficult work. And so when you were saying 1 billion people living in extreme poverty, I was immediately, the United Nations Population Fund, my favorite, read their added up document if you haven't yet. Last year, there were 54 million unintended pregnancies. More of those unintended pregnancies ended in unsafe abortion than in live births. However, also last year, PSI averted over 4 million unintended pregnancies, particularly amongst poor women. Long-lasting reversible contraceptives, meeting the unmet family planning needs of girls and women around the world with choices that are suitable for them culturally, for their particular context, for their reproductive and sexual needs at that time. So yes, overwhelm, solution. It's that flowing grace of, wow, this in this moment feels like it might kill me, and today I'm here for Fura Justine. Don't know. I've been thinking about her. I met her at a forcibly displaced persons camp in Eastern Congo, and I can see her, I can feel her, I can feel not only her skin, but the texture of her ragged pink polyester dress. And the Bhagavad Gita says, don't be anxious about the fruit of my work. I'm not in the results department. PSI is fortunately, measuring, being obsessive about data, showing our donors, including individuals, our disability-adjusted life years, which were 54 million last year. But I'm just supposed to show up and do the next good, right, honest thing. Constantly check my motives, do what's in front of me to do, and then have that healthy and loving detachment.
Well, one thing I was struck by in your memoir, All That Is Bitter and Sweet, was you recount going into the DRC and meeting women there, meeting rape survivors. And so, I'm getting that picture, I'm seeing it, Hollywood star comes, do that. And then what was really impressive to me was then you recount how you went to President Kagame in Rwanda across the border in the Great Lakes region, these militias that are causing those mass rapes in the DRC, they go back and forth. And I was really impressed by, okay, so this is, you're taking it to another level, it felt like, with that. Is that what you try to do with the trips that you take and with the work that you're doing?
I believe we all need a good listening to. And for some reason, people want to share their stories with me. And when you're talking about the armed militias who ravage Eastern Congo, most of the women with whom I sat in this one corrugated cardboard box hut, and it had a stamp on it, said that made in the USA. I'm sitting there with my back sweating against this American flag. I was the first person, according to her, that she had told that she was actually raped by the Congolese and not by FDLR. So they entrust me with these sacred narratives, and at my own peril, I ignore these, right? And so because of the Enough Project and the great John Prendergast, because of PSI, because of Women for Women International, because of the International Center for Research on Girls and Women, these doors are opened, and like I sent him a policy briefing, and the man read it. How awesome is that? And one of the women with whom I sat, she conceived in rape, and the name of her daughter is Naomi, which is my mother's name.
And on that same thing, I thought that Nick Kristoff's introduction to your memoir
You're making
also,
me look so
no,
good.
No, but
you're trotting out Kagame, Kristoff. You can keep the job.
Well, Kristoff, and I think that it is the big question. What is the proper role of someone who has become famous for working in the entertainment industry? What is that person's role, and what is the best that they can bring to these issues? And I thought that Kristoff summed it up well, so I'm going to just quote from him. He says, "She uses her fame to focus attention on issues of vital importance to all of us while giving voice to the voiceless around the world." And that just seemed like a great way of summing up what you're doing. But tell us a bit more about how your name recognition does open doors in places.
I hate this part of the conversation.
No, come on,
Can we change the subject?
Come on, no.
No, my stomach churned. You've said like that Hollywood thing like 3 times now. I don't know. I don't care. I'm completely agnostic. Let's move on. It's none of my business what other people think of me. I do it because I have to, and good people have given me the opportunity to.
Uh-huh. All right.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit more about PSI. Maybe not everybody knows PSI.
Right,
Why
the best NGO you've never heard of?
Okay.
Who came in the room not knowing about PSI? Good. Well, a lot of you do know. So it was founded in '73 as a family planning agency, and we measure our health impact the way that for-profit businesses measure their profits. And so it's very rigorous, and the fields are largely autonomous. That's the hospital in Kinshasa. That's the malaria ward. And we have family planning. We distributed, what did I say, 80 million long-lasting insecticide-treated nets
I think that's what you're saying
last
before.
year. Maternal mortality. I've been thinking a lot about maternal mortality this conference. One of the things that I don't think we say often enough, yes, the loss of a woman's life is tragic. To die while giving birth is obscene. Maternal mortality creates orphans. So it is in our best interests to prevent it, right? Safe drinking water, clean and safe home delivery kits. It's a good NGO, and I'm grateful to Kate Roberts for recruiting me in this letter, to which I responded with a single-spaced feminist manifesto. Because how do you do due diligence on a $450 million a year NGO? And she said, well, come to the field, see what it's like. And my first day, literally, I was in the child brothels in Phnom Penh. And the board of directors who welcomed me, the great Malcolm Potts at Berkeley, who's my family planning mentor, and all of the doors that have opened since, including the General Assembly of the UN.
Do you think that there's one issue in 2015 that is like the big issue for you in this coming year?
I think it's gender-based violence, and I think that mental health is the next frontier. I see that gender-based violence underscores all of our challenges, including access to health, which is the essential building block of all sustainability. I see these problems along a spectrum, right? So I end up in that brothel, or I end up in that camp, or I'm at a creche, as they would say in South Africa, and it's lack of access to education, it's lack of safe drinking water, it's lack of legal rights, lack of awareness about one's civic rights, land holding challenges, and whatever makes me craziest is where I want to go, because I think that's where I can be most effective. And I see the gender violence that underscores all of that. I was thinking about this woman I met in Nairobi, and she worked in a formal brick and mortar brothel. Her dad contracted HIV. He gave it to her mom. When both of them died, her brothers pushed them off the land because she didn't have legal rights. She had no information about sex education and how her body worked. She got pregnant by a boy she considered to be her boyfriend. When he found out about the pregnancy, he dumped her. She ends up pregnant in a brothel trying to feed herself. And then she has the baby, and she's breastfeeding and still being exploited for sex. And then so I start with the gender-based violence of that, which shows up in legal systems and healthcare systems and interpersonal relations. Can you tell I've got some energy around
Yeah,
that?
I can see some energy.
And I am one of those people. The first time I was molested, I was in the second grade. I was incested one summer by a close family friend, and I'm a survivor of 3 rapes, And thank God I had access to resources. I was 37 years old before that was extended to me, which is astonishing in this country. Here I am. I led campus-wide walks out of class when I was at the University of Kentucky as an undergrad. I'm not new to social justice. I'm not new to the idea of equality. But I didn't get that help for myself until another woman in recovery, who was also a survivor of GBV, reached out and said, there's help for someone like you too.
Do you think your personal experience with that affects the way you have empathy for people in the brothels in Phnom Penh or in Nairobi or in the DRC? Do you feel like you have a connection with some of these women that you might not have if you hadn't had that background?
I do, and I want to say a couple of things about that. One is everyone's experience is unique, and the day in the life of a child is very different from a day in the life of an adult. And I may have experienced something as hurtful that my sister didn't growing up in the same house. And it's important to understand the set point, or the emotional temperature of the individual, and not compare those experiences. I can't necessarily compare, and I wouldn't compare despair, my experience with, the woman in Madagascar who's being exploited for sex under a plastic tent that she and other exploited women saved their quarters for to be able to buy collectively, while her husband's standing 3 feet away holding their latest newborn. Can I compare my experience to that? Not necessarily, but it's the feelings. It's the neurological, the neuroanatomical imprint of trauma on the brain. It's the constraint of our full human expression and potential that gives the mutual understanding. I mean, I see women in brothels in India, and they're developing self-harm addictions just like our kids here. You know, a friend will say to me, I don't know what to do, my daughter's cutting, and I'm like, oh my God, if it's on her inner thighs, that's a sign of sex abuse. So yes, and by the way, the dark past becomes the greatest asset when it is empowered in that solution. So I used to have a sad story to tell, and I didn't have another story to tell because I hadn't gotten my own help yet. And now by the grace of, you know, what I consider to be this power greater than myself, and people who give away what they have so freely been given, it becomes the greatest asset.
What do you think people in the United States can do to support women or to help women get out of these types of situations?
Show up for your own life. Show up for your own life. Strong female-to-female alliances. So I'll give an example from yesterday. I was greeted by someone who held national office and is now very closely affiliated with the work I do internationally, and a very good person, and talked extensively about my appearance, and really went on and on and on about it. And so at the end of the evening, I said something to one of their colleagues, and the colleague said, oh, I say that to them all the time. And I said, does a straight woman? And they said, no. And I said, well, I will. So I had the courage. I have to risk their displeasure. I have to be willing to risk their displeasure to do that. And so I said, not if, but when I make mistakes or I step on your toes, you have my permission to let me know. It's important to me to get that kind of feedback, and I'm going to assume that's reciprocal. And what you were saying to me about my appearance and my body is totally inappropriate. On a terrace with champagne in Aspen.
And you don't shy away from a fight. Can we talk about this incident on Twitter recently?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know how many of you heard about this, but it was during the Arkansas-Kentucky game.
Yeah, well, we can leave Arkansas out of it because it's
whatever.
not the school's fight.
So anyway,
yeah.
You tweeted something about the
So
opponents.
Kentucky basketball
And
really
it was
is
not
Shug and basketball. That's really why we're
And
here.
the tweet that you put out was just, you know, in sports, people are just, you know, there's rivalries, and I saw your tweet. It didn't seem that offensive to me. And I mean, some of the words you were called on Twitter, I can't even say here. I mean, people.
I can.
Go ahead.
This one guy, and he's like, so Ashley Judd's acting like a cunt, and she is a cunt. What's the problem? And I said, it depends on how you define cunt. I said, I know what a dick is, you. So sometimes there is a place for humor, right? Sometimes there is a place for that kind of humor.
But there was a huge barrage of attacks on you, and you fought right back against it.
Well, I've been receiving hate speech, pornography, lots of remarks about my appearance, my age, my political affiliation, everything, for years and years and years. And I just hadn't done anything about it yet. I might engage with an individual, and often they will make their amend, right? They sort of break through that depersonalization and the anonymity of it. And this one guy is like, I think that looks like maybe your daughter in your avatar. I have some concern. Do you speak this way at home? And he was like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. So people will be accountable. But what happened after this basketball game, the violence of it, the gender violence directed to me, itself went viral. So it went way outside the basketball space, way outside the sports space in general. And it was my loved one, Dario, who called me up, and he was like, babe, this is not okay. I am so, and he is Scottish and he is mean, and he wanted to go get every one of them, right? And that got me to thinking, because I minimize my own abuse as a woman in this world. And I wrote, and it's that dark night of the soul. And, you know, Joseph Campbell, oh my God, I'm going to cry again. Joseph Campbell talks about when I get close to that breakthrough, the systems of oppression rise even more fiercely. But so do the angels, so do the guides, you know? And I sat there in my little nightgown, and I wrote my piece about it. And without anyone to counsel me, I just decided to publish it on mic.com, mic.com, news by millennials, for millennials, check it out. And it went viral because it's a universal experience. Mine may seem amplified or exaggerated, but it's really same. And then all those strong female-to-female alliances, all roads go back to Gloria, She put me in touch with the Women's Media Center. Julie Burton created expanding speech. Sorry, it's new.
Sorry.
Women's Media Center.
Okay.
Curbing Abuse, Expanding Expression, which I am now curating with the great Soraya Chomali, who's been working on online gender violence since it emerged.
Do you think gender violence outside the U.S. is any different than gender violence here?
No, same.
And
continuums, more covert, more subtle. So I really like the Duluth model, the wheel that shows the cycle of violence and control from subtle to covert, and it concludes with imminent homicidality, which is choking is imminent homicidality, and it also has a wheel of nurturing and safety. I was looking at that with 2 teenagers, and they were whispering to each other about how boys have choked them.
we're hitting all these cheerful topics here.
And there are solutions. When a woman is empowered with modern family planning and she can choose the contraceptive that's right for her, particularly in a developing region, she has the power to negotiate safer sex. She becomes more empowered to refuse unwanted sex. She has greater decision-making about her health and her children's health. I mean, capturing the social and economic goods of empowering girls and women is vast. And interestingly, PSI shows that investing in a constellation of services through an integrated model is more cost-effective than investing in one intervention. For every year a girl stays in school, her income rises by 10 to 20%. If 1% of more girls could stay in secondary school, a country's per capita income goes up 0.3%. I mean, it's such low-hanging fruit. Has anybody even said that yet at the conference? Am I the first one? Low-hanging fruit. But it's the truth.
You also worked on A Path Appears that came out this year. And what I thought was interesting there was you're looking at sex trafficking in the United States. Did you see correlations between the sex trafficking that you were seeing in Phnom Penh and the stuff that you were seeing?
Same.
Again, same. So.
Same. So I'm very proud of the United States government because within Health and Human Services, just last week, they announced the creation of an office dedicated to fighting labor and sex slavery in the United States. And the new director of that is Catherine Chan, who's the co-founder of the Polaris Project, which she founded as an undergrad with a fellow. And Polaris is really special. Check it out. As kids, they started this trafficking hotline, and it is now used by the Department of Justice of the United States of America. Like, they passed the first legislation because they didn't know that's hard to do. And a whole other interesting thing would be to talk about the new legislation that's been passed, because I have survivors have different perspectives on it. I'm challenged by saying, a boy or man on his way to work on a Monday who exploits a woman for sex is the same thing as a trafficker and not just a John. If we could consider, first of all, if we could strike child prostitute from our vocabulary, that would be a leap in our country, because there's no such thing. And if we could regard exploiting children for sex as child abuse, that would be a huge uptick. And asking people in my community to make the stretch that now their relatives who frequent prostitutes are human traffickers anyway. The bill is very outstanding in many ways, and we just convened the first ever national summit. The state directors of child welfare from all 50 states were there, court improvement programs, the judicial. It's a wonderful thing, and yes, it's in this country. I mean, I had someone who's, top brass at the Aspen Festival go, in America? Yeah, in America. And the technology is great. Apps that survivors can use to get connected with everything from, my friend Shauna has a $sign tattoo on her face that her pimp put on, to get their tattoos removed, to find a safe place to crash for the night. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening out there fighting human trafficking in the U.S.
And what about abroad? What do you see? Do you see things that are exciting internationally around sex
I
trafficking?
do, and no panel is complete, obviously, without mentioning Nick, so we'll talk about him again, and we'll have to say Bono's name at least once, right? Because he's largely responsible for getting me into what I call this holy mess. Uh-huh. So they reached out to me before the One campaign with data that presaged the One campaign. But when we finished A Path Appears, and I said to Nick, what would you have me do? He loves PSI. He loves International Center for Research. And he said, intimate partner violence and sex slavery in the United States. That's where he would dispatch me. And then we talked about family planning in Sri Lanka because he's cool, where the needle is moving. But yes, it's the same thing. It's objectifying, it's sexually objectifying girls and women, and the age is dropping, including in the global north. Lack of access to empowerment. And if the one thing I leave you with is when you walk out of here, believe the child, that's what I got on the plane. Believe the child, witness their experience, be recruited to their welfare.
When you go on those trips, is it emotionally overwhelming for you? Does it energize you? What's the effect on you of being out there in the field?
I love it so much.
Yeah.
I love it. It's all I want to do. And I remember, there is such a thing as re-entry, right? It's tough. And the first time I came home from Rwanda and Congo, actually, I was flat on my back for 3 weeks. There was this one tree. I walked around the corner of my home and I saw this one tree and it took my breath away because of the deforestation and the difficulty with the stress on the environment. And I finally went to my doctor, and he's a really sweet guy. He said, there's nothing wrong with you except for reverse culture shock. And he said I would suggest some grief work and I would suggest some trauma work. So I went to see a woman who does EMDR, and all I did was weep. And I was like, am I doing it right? Because I wasn't doing the EMDR. And she said, honey, you are doing it great. And it does get easier, but I remember taking a shower in one of those lounges at the O'Hare Airport, and the guy who escorted me, he was like, be careful, the towel rack is heated. It might... Like, the greatest threat to my bodily integrity today is a heated towel rack. And the breakdown and the breakthrough. When you say, does it stress me? Yeah, listen to the people in the hotel room next to me who hear me cry. But yeah, and having that power greater than myself is what works. Finding an intimate, personal relationship with something sweeter is what restores me to sanity and gets me going again. The hardest thing I've ever done is walk out of an orphanage.
No, I was based in Johannesburg for 4 years, and my wife and I started volunteering at an orphanage there, and yeah, it was that was in between 2002 and 2006, and those rooms. I remember we used to go, and all they wanted from the volunteers who came in was to hold the babies and change diapers.
Absolutely.
And all those children they just wanted to be held.
Yeah.
And it was so hard to leave. It was so hard to walk out of there.
So we talk about the brain science of skin-to-skin contact. Have you held someone today? Have you been held? I love to be held. It's a fundamental part of my staying able to show up and do the work.
Well, I'm sure many of you here also have some questions for Ashley. If you do, I think we've got some mics around. Just go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you, but wait till you actually get the microphone. You may have blown everybody away to the point where no one has any questions. But, somebody back there. Yeah? Or was she just checking her hair? Over here.
No one else has anything.
Do you have a name? What's your name?
I do have a name, Gwen Pfister
Hi.
Bowling. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky, and I am an adult psychiatrist. And I have a 15-year-old daughter who has activists in her heart. How can I channel her in this direction? She has all this passion, and do you have any advice about that? How we get our kids to find a need that's appropriate and to work in that direction?
It's a wonderful question. I don't know that I actually have an answer. I have a hunch that in her heart, she already knows. I know parent-child interactions I have seen that are helpful. Love her and admire that part of her. Don't praise necessarily what she does or the actions that she takes, but affirm that you love that part of her soul. That's the place to start.
Over here.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to say your presence has been incredibly warming. I've encountered you at various places around campus, and it's unlike any other sort of quote-unquote celebrity appearance. You've been a really warming presence. My question is around what people can do as they consume media and they actually interact with sort of the day in, day out content to actually be effective towards making change just sort of in their everyday media consumption lives around the work that you're doing.
Wow. I go on media fasts. I know that's something that's helpful for me. I'm very selective about the content to which I expose myself. I do follow a lot of feminist writers. I find them to be inspirational and helpful. It's a nice antidote to the casual misogyny that I experience in the media. Sharing that information, I think, is really powerful. And I thought you were going to say something about markets. And so I think I can put together making markets work for poor people, which has been a huge theme that I've heard at every single panel I've had the opportunity to attend. And then also as a consumer of media, creating the demand side of healthy, solution-based social justice media.
Right there in the middle. We have someone.
Hi, my name is Emmy Ganos. I really appreciated this presentation, and I feel like a lot of what you talked about had to do with some of the darkest parts of American culture, especially when it comes to misogyny. I wonder if you have any suggestions about what are some of the strongest ways to tackle culture change related to the issues that you care about, like gender-based violence and mental health.
I love an organization called Demand Abolition, if we're talking, for example, about sex and labor slavery in the United States, because there's the supply side, right, and there's the demand side. And it's research and evidence-based, and local communities are able to implement those findings. So, checking out what the laws are in your area, they're probably reasonable and laws with which you agree, but checking on the enforcement and the implementation when it comes to girls and women who've been exploited for sex. Are they arrested or are they given services, which is part of what this new legislation does. It starts to move victims out of the penal system and treating them punitively and connects them with the social services that they need. I think that's a wonderful place to start. And just having open dialogue. Like, I constantly have to rigorously examine, patriarchy is not a system. Patriarchy is not boys and men. It is a system in which I also participate. And so I constantly have to evaluate and be honest with myself about ways that I insidiously and nefariously travel that terrain myself. So it starts with me, and then in my female-to-female alliances, my relationships with boys and men, and then looking on the community level about the things about which I care the most, because I think that's where I will be self-sustainable in order to go the distance with making the change. Does that help?
Over here.
There was a birth announcement. I know it's like negative stuff. There was a birth announcement someone next to me on the plane had, and it was clearly a boy, and it said little man, and it had little onesies, and they all had ties on them. And I was like, whereas my friend Marshall, who's just had a baby, they're doing orange and red and yellow. And they said when it comes time for Zuri to choose her own outfits, she may have whatever she wants. We are not going to just inundate her unconsciously with these heteronormative social constructs of gender right now.
Okay, I have to ask you about the Supreme Court decision, though. What was your reaction to the gay marriage ruling?
Seems pretty self-evident to me.
Yeah, it was a pretty big week, though, from the Supreme Court, getting the Affordable Care Act.
Yes. And tomorrow is a big day, too, because the court will decide whether or not it's going to hear 2 cases regarding women's health, and they are Trojan horses in which constraining access to safe and legal abortion hide. And that's obviously a big deal. And I love Melinda Gates so much. No controversy, family planning. You avert a pregnancy, you eliminate the need for an abortion.
Let's go over here.
Thank you, Ashley. My name's Danny, and I've spent my career living and working in the Middle East. I've seen a lot of change with the way women are treated, the role of women, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Can you say a little bit about your experiences there and living in a religion with Islam and how we might go in the future to help?
Well, if you'll invite me, I'll come visit because I've never been.
Okay.
But I was so excited earlier today at the Aspen lecture on mental health. It was presented because the presenter, whose name I don't know, talked a lot about mental health programs in Pakistan. And when I was talking with Dr. Fauci last night, I said, if you had one thing that you would have me say today, what would it be? And there were actually two things. One is Ebola was a disease of poverty, so it speaks to inequities in health, and the opportunity to build these health systems on the ground, and then not just integrating services through them. I mean, when I started a few years ago, and I went with the Minister of Health in Kenya to see a malaria program, that was all that brick and mortar clinic did was malaria. I mean, it seems so antiquated now, right? But even taking mental health and emotional wellness into these health systems and community health workers and peer-to-peer and using mobile devices to augment the services provided to include mental health and trauma recovery, which is being done in Pakistan, which is very exciting. It was Judy Bass at Hopkins who did that. Hope that helps.
Down here in the front. Just 1 second, they're bringing the mic.
Hi, my name is Mira Singh. I'm going to be a sophomore at Tufts, and in college, obviously, I've seen so many of my friends have experienced sexual violence, and there's just so much like misogyny in that culture. But it's kind of, I know there's been a lot of like the Rolling Stone article and everything, but there's so much like casual talk about that. And I was wondering if you've done anything with that, and also relating that to mental health and like post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. Have you encountered any of that?
I have. I mean, I certainly, there's depression in my family, there's alcoholism and addiction in my family. And of course, I think that from which I'm very happily in recovery now because I work really hard at it, but my own experiences with major recurrent depression must be tied to sexual trauma. And I was so happy with the Vanderbilt convictions because there was a woman who experienced an absolutely horrific rape at Vanderbilt, and the non-intervening bystanders, there is no such thing, were charged as the active rapist was. Huge. And there's a very good article that was just published in Harvard Law Review by Diane Rosenfeld about campus rape. So she addresses the Rolling Stone article and all of that. And you know, I was a sorority woman. I fortunately did not have those experiences. And I'm thinking I was thinking this could be a very interesting documentary. There was a woman in my sorority who was gang raped by a member of her fraternity where I went to parties all the time. She vanished. The adults swept in and picked her up by the scruff of the neck and hauled her off to I know not where. And it was never discussed. And that was a feminist sorority. Like, I learned to walk around naked comfortably in front of large groups of women in that sorority. You know what I mean? And I'm glad you brought it up, and I'd like to know what you're going to do on your campus about it.
So that's kind of what I was thinking about, just thinking of ways to make a difference across campuses, because I've seen it everywhere, and it's so under, like, there's rape and then there's other sexual violence, and it's not just rape, there's like comments and there's so much going on, and I want to do something about it, so figuring that out, what that will
I
be.
can share some resources with you after. I think it's really important to start with girls and women and also reaching out to boys and men about behavior change. So there's a great program called MVP, Mentoring Violence Prevention, and they go to, for example, a sporting team and identify the captain or some other athlete with a lot of social capital. And if they're interested, they're given, gender sensitivity training, wolf whistling is not appropriate, and how to disrupt that when it happens, to have the courage and the communication skill set to say, not okay. And I mean, I know feminist boys and men who themselves, when they're with their cohort in those privileged male-to-male spaces where they won't do that, And
Sorry.
Go ahead.
it's so hard because everyone when they're alone says they completely support equality and everything like that, and then when you get in a group like a frat or something like that, the dynamic completely changes. And so like tackling individuals so that the whole can change, kind of. Thank you.
And the myth of if you talk back, it invites further violence, that may be some people's experience. And also, we know our assailants. Like, the whole idea of stranger rape is exaggerated. I was in Long Beach, and there was a street festival going on, and day after day, I mean, the comments were unbelievable, including a police officer. So I got his badge number and called him in. And I walked, one morning to walk the dogs, and somebody hollered at me, and I just turned around and bellowed and said, "You better not be fucking talking to me." And they shut up. And actually, I'm a fairly skilled fighter, so I was walking into a festival once, and these, this one, that one. And I had to the first thing I did was get my visual imprint. Are they carrying any weapons? How do I, So anyway, I kind of like to fight.
I'm getting a little bit of this theme of you as this disruptive force at times going into
I'll take it.
Yes.
I'll take it.
But yesterday we were chatting, you mentioned going to Bollywood and talking about
Yes.
condoms in Bollywood. And tell that story about when you went there and met with people on the sets of these Bollywood movies.
Well, using local people who have that cultural value and to whom people look up is so valuable. Like, I've been tested for HIV with so many soap opera stars around the world. It's a great thing to do, and we're tested in public. And of course, the technology has advanced so much. There are rapid results, and there's the voluntary counseling and testing. And if your status is discongruent with your partner, all of that wonderful stuff, which PSI does abundantly. And in Bollywood, we reached out to those mega stars. They are absolutely worshipped. And so I am called the Vanna White of condom demonstrations for a reason. Get that anatomically correct wooden model and stand with the great action star and do condom demonstrations for thousands of truckers. We're a very high-risk population. And I just want to say something else about love, if I may.
Go right ahead.
So when I started, I had the outrage, right? And I think that there's healthy anger, absolutely. It gives strength, it gives energy, and it gives motivation. But previously, I had to watch that anger because it could really, burn me out. But I started with that, and I started with love. And then things started to happen over the course of this work that I didn't even know were possible or that I even wanted. And I began to love perpetrators. Love them. And there's this one trucker in particular in India at Cotton Green, and we were just hanging out for the day. And he was identified as a very high-risk individual and had some STIs and very likely would take them home to his wife who couldn't negotiate a condom or a female condom. That's another fun thing to do. Go into your drugstores at home and say, "Where do you keep the female condoms?" It's so much fun. And at the end of the day, I said, "So tell me where you are with having sex with children." He said, "Oh, I would never do that, but a lot of my friends do." I said, "Well, would you maybe hold as a possibility that if you don't think that's appropriate, that maybe you'd talk to one of your friends about that someday?" And he said, "Yeah, I could consider that." And I was just flooded with this love at the end of our visit. It was really something.
So what can we expect to see from you in the
I haven't the vaguest idea.
Yeah. Are you planning to be working more on movies, more on humanitarian work? You don't know.
Suit up and show up.
Yeah.
Just suit up and show up. I'm very grateful that I've rotated off the board at PSI and they still allow me to hang around with them, bug them. I work with demand. I think that the sex and intimate partner slavery in the U.S. is a big deal, and I will work on that. The woman who spoke earlier, she said they were going to take mental health conversation to the World Bank, and I'm like, pick me. So I've got a couple movies coming out in October, and I'll go backpacking in the Smokies, of course, which I love to do. A little bit of everything. God does good work.
Well, thank you for coming and sharing with us today. It's been great.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.